Hello, everyone. Today we are hosting a webinar on sleep issues, and Emily is a BCBA, and she'll be presenting on the sleep issues and the tips and strategies to to tackle them. So I'm gonna let Emily introduce herself and give us a little overview on her knowledge on this. So Emily, go ahead, it's your turn.
All right, well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to see that so many people decided to come on a Sunday and talk about this topic. My name is Emily Ice, and I love sleep. I'm also a board certified behavior analyst, and I've been in the field for well over a decade. My oldest daughter, this is her, you can see her sleeping funny here. She's now 10, and she was a terrible sleeper. I didn't understand how you could be a terrible sleeper. I have always been a great sleeper. It's come easy to me. And I didn't know what to do about it. She was keeping me awake every night. And so bedtime was a struggle. She would wake in the middle of the night. She would wake early, the whole gamut. My younger daughter didn't have these same sleeping issues. She would go to bed without too much fuss and slept through the night for the most part. And even with my experience with the ABA, I had no idea how to help my older daughter, Sophia, learn how to sleep. I just thought it was like a biological, some people just don't sleep well, and just hoped very dearly that she would grow out of it. As I moved through my career and education, I began to see that my clients also often had sleep disturbances. I run a center that provides ABA primarily to children with autism. And I saw that about more than half of the children who came through our doors were on some type of medication intended to induce sleep. I started asking physicians about their opinions, reaching out to other BCBAs to try and find resources to help these families. I was given a few tips about sleep hygiene and daytime exercise, those sort of preliminary things that we hear in the news, things like that, but there was not an easy answer to provide to my client's family, to my client's parents. So this, in addition to Sophia's sleeping problems, solidified my desire to figure out how to work on sleep behaviorally. I am a BCBA after all, that's what we work on. We look at the behavior and try and figure out how to help change the environment to learn behaviors. So I started working on my doctorate, and my focus, I'm still working on it, and my focus is on behavioral sleep treatments. So I've been researching it, I've been doing this for several years now, and over these past few years, I've been able to address sleep issues for my clients. Then I found out a whole field called behavioral sleep medicine, and within that field, there's this treatment called cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia, and it has proven time and time again to alleviate sleep issues for all ages. It's unfortunately not very well known, and I think it's not disseminated very well. So that's part of what my goal is to help people gain access to behavioral sleep medicine and hopefully learn some tips and tricks. So I will be sharing an overview of what behavioral sleep medicine or cognitive behavior therapy is, and offering some general tips toward healthy sleep habits in this webinar. But I would also urge you to consult with a professional that's versed in behavioral sleep medicine if you're not finding success with some of these preliminary steps. A professional can help you develop a plan that will be effective and modify it as needed for you and your family. trying out the info I provide here. It's just not quite the same as having a professional help you. So please I urge you to not try these tips and then say, oh, I tried it, that behavioral sleep treatment stuff, and it just doesn't work. It may just be that you need a little bit more of a specific plan, and you can still get help toward healthy sleep treatment or healthy sleep in your house. So I'm happy to work directly with you. There's professionals listed on these sites. The www.behavioralsleep.org has a whole page where you can click on the location. They have even outside of the United States, if you're not in the United States, they do have professionals internationally. And then I put Victoria Tenenbaum's information because she is a collaborator of mine. I've known her for a few years while we've been kind of working through figuring out this behavioral sleep treatment and navigating through that world. And she focuses on infants and toddlers, which particularly for the infants is a little bit, there's more sleep stages and infant development to take into consideration. I haven't focused on that in my studies. I have focused on for toddlers, preschools, all the way up into adulthood for individuals with disabilities or for adults who are experiencing sleep issues. So there's some resources. My website is thestepinautism.com. We do have a page on sleep treatment. I have consulted with people via telehealth, and I would be happy to answer any questions you guys have at the end of this seminar, or if you can't ask them today, feel free to contact me. So I want to begin by clarifying this. You are not alone. Sleep issues for children, especially children with developmental disabilities such as autism, are common. So know that you're not alone, though it definitely feels that way in the middle of the night, I know. Children without a developmental disability, 35 to 50% of those children have sleep disturbances. Children with a developmental disability, you can see it jumps drastically to 63 to 86%. For adults, just across the board, adults, 25 to 33% of us have sleep issues. So one of the important things that I have found is that understanding sleep, it helps to kind of create a knowledge base to allow us to set up contingencies that will make us more successful at sleep or help our children be more successful at sleep. Sleep is complex. It's affected by a variety of environmental and biological factors. We have two very important aspects of sleep rhythm in our bodies, and the circadian rhythm, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is kind of our biological clock. It is controlled by the suprachiasmatic nuclei, and the nuclei receive input from light, primarily blue spectrum light, in our environment. And that's what sets our body up. It starts the hormone process in the morning, and it is cyclical. So once we begin that process in the morning, then it kind of carries through. It keeps us in tune with our environment. That's the purpose of this circadian rhythm system. And then we also have this homeostatic sleep drive. And the homeostatic sleep drive is influenced by the amount of time that we have been awake, to simplify it. So, you wake up in the morning, and then by the evening, you're starting to feel sleepy again. Additionally, it's important to know that if we miss sleep, or we stay up really late, or we miss a whole night's sleep, our bodies will make up for it at the next sleep cycle that we are able to obtain. So we might sleep deeper, or we might sleep for a longer period of time, but our bodies will use it. It's kind of like a bank. We can fill up that bank, and if it gets too empty, then when we sleep again, we will fill it up really fast, or we'll sleep longer to make sure we get that bank full. Another aspect of understanding sleep that's important is to understand that we go through these sleep stages. And many people know that we have these REM sleep and non-REM sleep, but there's a little bit more complexity to it, because you can see we'll start off in this, we fall asleep and we enter this stage 1 where it's a really light sleep. This might be where you're kind of drifting off to sleep, and then if something happens, you wake up right away. And that's because you haven't really fallen down into the sleep. You're still very susceptible. It's easy to wake up in this stage. Stage 2, you get a little bit deeper, a little bit harder to wake up. Your brain waves change a little bit, but it's still pretty light sleep. Stage 3, you start to get into the restorative type sleep. It is a little bit deeper, definitely harder to wake up from. If you do get woken up from stage 3, and then you might feel groggy, and definitely stage 4. This is your deepest sleep, and it's thought to be the stage where the most restoration, we get the most recovery, our bodies kind of get the deepest amount of recovery from our day in this stage 4 sleep. If you get woken up from this stage 4 sleep, that's where you feel really groggy. You're like, what is going on? I don't know. You know, you feel just very out of place, at least for a few moments. And then you come back up into stage 3, stage 2, and you get back up into this stage 1 or REM sleep, where REM sleep is where you get these dreams, right? Your brain is working really fast. There's lots of neurons are firing. It's your body is very still, and REM is that rapid eye movement that you hear about frequently, where your eyes are kind of darting back and forth. And what's interesting about REM is that your body goes atonic, so you don't move at all during REM sleep. And the hypothesis there is that because your brain is working so hard, and you have so much neurons firing, the atonic phase of your muscle movement keeps you from jumping out of the window in the middle of the night, because you're not going to act out those dreams because your body can't move. So an interesting part of the sleep stage that I want to point out is that you'll go into this, you go down into the deep stage 4 sleep, and then you'll come back up and you get some REM sleep. You go back down into stage 4 sleep usually, and then you'll come back, and then you can see the next few cycles you are going into stage 3, and then you just go into stage 2 until you come into wake. So it's important to recognize that this very restorative sleep is taking place earlier in the night than these other sleeps. So it kind of fades off, you can see. So another component to consider is that children 5 years and older and adults, this cycle from stage 1 and back into REM here, this little cycle here takes about 90 minutes. Children under the age of 5, it's a little bit shorter. You see somewhere between 50 and 60 minutes. And I don't put infancy in this presentation because infant sleep really rapidly changes over that first year. So infants, you'll see they're even shorter. They actually spend a variable amount of time in this deep sleep versus the REM. It's a little bit different than what you start to develop into after about 12 months of age. So what types of sleep problems might you be experiencing? Well, you might be seeing that you or your child have difficulty falling asleep, and that's where maybe you go to bed or you put your child to bed and it's taking them 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, sometimes even longer to fall asleep. You might see that there's some challenges with nighttime compliance. You know, maybe your little one is calling out a lot. Maybe they come into your bed. Maybe they're crying or having tantrums about going to bed. And then you might also see that there's night awakenings. And we do discern between night awakenings and early awakenings when we're talking about sleep problems. And so night awakenings are if they're waking in the middle of the night for a period of time, but then they fall back asleep at some point. Now, sometimes I will say that they might wake up at midnight and they're not falling back asleep until 5 a.m. I've seen that. And so you might have some very strong behaviors in the middle of the night. They might just have a hard time falling back asleep. You know, a lot of times the clientele that I work with, the parents will have safety issues, so they have to be awake when the child is awake because that child needs to be monitored and made sure that they're not having any, they're not getting into any safety hazards. And then early awakenings are going to be where they wake in the middle of the night or prior to wake time, and then they stay awake. So I've worked with some children who they will wake up at 1 or 2 a.m. and then they are up for the day. And again, these children, you know, they have autism or some other developmental disability, many of them do. And so the family then is usually awake from 2 a.m. for the rest of the day. And then there's advanced sleep problems. And these are things like night terrors, sleepwalking, sleep apnea, enuresis, which is nighttime bedwetting, circadian rhythm disorders, etc. And I don't really go into these too much today. I will talk a little bit more broadly about some of these other things. There are some behavioral things you can do for some of these, but typically we do suggest that you do you have the child do a sleep study or something like that for some of these, particularly sleep apnea and sleepwalking. Okay, so next I wanted to make sure that we understood reasonable expectations. So when we talk about sleep expectations, we want to make sure that we're not trying to get the child to sleep more than what is biologically necessary for them, because that's a lot of times where you will start to see some issues, right? If we are trying to keep a child in bed for too long, or we're thinking that they're not getting enough sleep, so we have their bedtime set so that their bedtime to their wake time is too much of a span, then you'll typically see some resistant behaviors because sleep is not coming naturally or easily to them. So toddlers 1 to 2 years of age, we're looking at 11 to 14 hours of sleep. That's total, so count the naps in there. Preschoolers, 3 to 5 years of age, are going to shorten a little bit, 10 to 13 hours of sleep. And then it drops again around 6 to 13 years of age. And again, for teenagers, 8 to 10 hours is of sleep. And then another thing that I would like to point out that I have noticed in my career and the research that I've done is that children with autism tend to have shorter sleep durations and poorer sleep quality and longer sleep onset time. So they tend to sleep for a shorter amount of time. They tend to not get as good of sleep during the night, and it tends to take them longer to fall asleep. So a lot of times when we find the quote unquote ideal sleep time for our children with autism is it tends to be closer to this first number than this latter number. So if they're 3 to 5 years of age, we'll probably see that they're going to be sleeping ideal amount of time around 10 hours a night. All right, so why does all of this matter? Well, understanding the complexities of sleep allows us to be more mindful about our children's sleep environments, habits, and related daytime experiences. And this will help them sleep better. And of course, when they sleep better, we sleep better. When we look at sleep behaviorally, we look at what is happening early in the night. This is where we look at things like nighttime routine, And then we look at what happens right before we fall asleep. And this we call behavioral quietude. So we have to teach the child to be still and quiet and somehow have a quiet mind. And that then allows them to fall asleep. And then we call this the sleep state. And it's an interesting component in a behavioral contingency because it is going to be reinforcing because it is restorative by nature. There's no behaviors that we can see exhibited outwardly because they are asleep, but they do have neural and metabolic activity happening. And so this kind of background knowledge brings me to, okay, so what do we do? So the first thing that we have to look at is, does he know how to fall asleep? So these are things where you might look at, are there any items that they have to have with them? Is there a special blankie? Do they have to have mom or dad in the room with them? Is there a TV or a device that has to be turned on? And how is their nighttime compliance? Are they following the nighttime routine? Are you seeing that they're having resistance early in the nighttime routine? Are you seeing that there's resistance later in the nighttime routine? This shows us where part of the behavioral aspects are that we can address. So knowing how to sleep is a skill. It requires behavioral quietude, which means that they're not engaging in any other activities. When they're crying or they're calling out or they're getting out of bed to come to us, they're not engaging in that behavioral quietude where they can fall asleep on their own. And it requires compliance to stay in bed without distractions or other people having to help them fall asleep. And so some of these are aspects that we might be addressing in a behavior plan for a child who is having challenges falling asleep. We might look at making sure that their room is set up and that they're not requiring somebody else to be there. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And then we look at optimizing the sleep environment. So our body temperature drops slightly in preparation for sleep. So if she likes to sleep with a heavy blanket, you might want to make sure that the room is cooler. Warm baths actually bring our body temperature up, which can delay the sleep process because part of that physiological response to falling asleep is that our body temperature drops. So if bath time, a warm bath, if that's part of the sleep routine, then we suggest to have that earlier in the routine so that their body is able to kind of bring the temperature down throughout the rest of the routine. Next, white or brown noise has been shown to have positive impacts on both falling asleep and staying asleep. The white noise helps to cancel out any other possible sounds that might interrupt the transition from awake to sleep. Sleep can be elusive. Our lizard brains stay alert, and they will bring us to consciousness if we hear something surprising or alerting. And when that happens for your child, they're going to come up into consciousness and then they're going to call out and want you to help them put them back to sleep. Additionally, as we discussed earlier, our brains receive wakefulness signals from light spectrum waves. So making sure that the room is reasonably dark will help keep our brains from getting confused with regard to when we are supposed to be awake or asleep. A dim night light can help ward off anxiety, and that's fine. And then, of course, this brings us to TV, tablet screens at night. These light and sound emitting devices are often the culprit of a bad night's sleep. Even us adults are notorious for giving into the pull of mindless entertainment in those light sleep late hours. The step of phasing out these devices can be daunting, but it is well worth it in the long run. Another consideration is she prepared to go to sleep? Along the lines of phasing out less optimal nighttime habits, we look to replacing them with more sleep-inducing habits. Many people have a hard time or have heard about a bedtime routine, and many have tried it with varying degrees of success. So I want you to think about the nighttime routine as a transition from awake to asleep. So it should take tolerable steps from the excitement of the day to the quiet stillness required for sleep. So think about what appropriate steps might be for you and your family. Are you going from TV time in the evening directly to asleep? How can we make these steps in between easier? For one, you could go from TV to something slightly less preferred. Maybe this is a good place for snack or tub time. Then from there to something a little bit calmer, perhaps putting on PJs, brushing teeth, etc. Then from there to something, like a story, tux, or, and then bidding good night. Of course, everybody's routine is going to be a little bit different. The goal is that it's consistent. Do you want to commit to tub time every night? If not, don't put it in the routine. You can do it prior to the routine start. You can do it earlier in the day, but you don't have to make that as part of the nighttime routine. So this consistency allows your child to know what is coming. It prepares his or her mind and body for falling asleep. If your child doesn't like going to bed, you can try adding some special things, such as a special surprise under the pillow for when they get into bed. Sometimes this is a nice little boost of making bedtime exciting. If little one is getting some new pajamas, you can tuck them under the pillow, and then as you're going through the routine, you can say, oh, I put a little special surprise under your pillow, and then they get into bed and they get excited. Or maybe a new book could go under their pillow, and it doesn't have to be every night. It can be, every once in a while, just to make sure that that whole getting into bed is it's a pleasurable experience, and it's a little bit of fun for them, right? Another note is to make sure that bed is only for sleeping. So in the ABA world, we call this pairing. If the bed is always and only for sleeping, then it's more likely that she falls asleep quickly when she gets into it. Some children like to play with toys or read in bed. While it seems harmless, if that child is having a hard time falling asleep, the simple act of playing or reading in a different location can make a big difference. I worked with a little guy, he was 8, he was having a hard time falling asleep, and I got to talk with him, and he was playing action figures in his bed, and he had a bunk bed, his brother slept above him, and he would get into bed and he would quietly play with his toys. He wasn't even disturbing his brother could sleep, but he was having a hard time falling asleep, and it was bothering him. And so him and I talked, and mom got a rug that was somewhere else in the room, and she set it right next to his bed, and he had his little bucket of his action figure toys, and he decided, after we talked about this, that he would play with the action figure toys on the rug next to his bed, and then when he felt tired, he would climb into bed and play and fall asleep. And he saw that within about a week, he was falling asleep quicker and easier, and he would be able to get into bed earlier in the evening and fall right asleep. So what do we do about those dreaded early and night awakenings? I think of all of the consultations that I have done over the past couple years, these have been the most daunting for the family, is the early and night awakenings. And so first we have to look at that first question that we talked about earlier. Does he know how to fall asleep on his own? because if he can't fall asleep on his own at bedtime, we cannot expect him to fall back asleep on his own when he wakes in the middle of the night. So we have to make sure that we really address that first question. Then we want to make sure that the environment has not changed. So this is a big one, and it can be a culprit for a lot of our kiddos that are waking in the middle of the night. As if you remember that sleep cycle, we get those deep sleeps to the beginning, but then when they come up into that light sleep, if something has changed in the environment, it might be enough to bring your little one all the way up to consciousness from, just that light sleep up into consciousness. So if they fell asleep with the TV on, and then the TV's changed to a different show, or it's turned off, that little change in the environment might be enough to bring them up to consciousness. Or if you do have a white noise machine and it's on a timer, a lot of the ones that are sold will be on a timer to save the batteries. And so they'll fall asleep with that white noise, and then it shuts off after a certain amount of time. And that change is enough in that light sleep cycle to bring them up to consciousness. And then again, if he doesn't know how to fall back asleep on his own, then he's up and he's looking for you to help him. Next, we want to reduce the chance that other physiological mechanisms will bring him up to full consciousness. This is where that making sure we have all of the components in the nighttime routine can help. If you think about it, like each little piece of the nighttime routine might be reducing that chance that they're going to wake up in the middle of the night. So did they use the restroom? Did they have a snack? So that we make sure that in the middle of the night, they're not waking up to go to the bathroom, or they're not waking up because they're hungry. Is the environment cool enough so they're not waking up because they're too hot? All of these little things, if you just change one of them, it might not make a difference. But if you kind of look at the entire picture, you might find that optimum environment and consistency through the night to help them. And then another one that I found to be huge and often overlooked is the consideration of what the child is doing in the morning upon waking. Several families who I've worked with in the past have little ones who would wake in the morning, whether at a decent hour or not, and go watch TV or play on the iPad. It was a relatively quiet and engaged activity, one of the few engaged activity that these little ones had. So even though a parent would have to maybe get up and be on the couch to ensure some semblance of supervision for safety, the parents would often be able to kind of relax or snooze or just have a few minutes in the morning while little one was watching the TV or playing on the iPad. When we look at this from a waking behavior standpoint, we can see that the waking behavior, the act of actually waking up, was being paired with a very highly reinforcing activity. And when we looked with the family, it was one that they weren't getting to do very much later in the day. So they'd wake up, they'd watch their iPad, or they'd play on their iPad, and that was very exciting for these children. So what we were actually doing was reinforcing that waking behavior. And so the little ones would start waking earlier and earlier and earlier. And if you remember that those very restorative sleep stages, they occurred early in the night. So by 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., the little ones have had, quote unquote, enough sleep to get by. So if they are waking at that point in the middle of the night and they're unable to put them back to sleep, or are very excited about the preferred activity in the morning, then they're going to be more likely to start their day. So we want to look at maybe moving that highly preferred activity to a place a little bit farther away from the waking behavior. So with that, I talk to families about developing a waking routine. So they get up, use the bathroom, wash their hands, eat breakfast, and then they can watch their TV show, and then they can play on their iPad, however that looks like for your family. So in looking all of that, then I get the question, should I medicate? So, and this is often a sensitive topic. We do not have medication which successfully assists children in sleeping. We do have medication which successfully sedates children. So it helps them fall asleep. It puts, puts them out. However, I always do discourage medication for two reasons. First, it doesn't allow the child to learn to fall asleep. So then if they wake in the middle of the night, they're not going to be able to fall back asleep. And because they're not coherent through that process of falling asleep. So if the medication is taken away or they wake in the middle of the night, then the falling asleep behavior goes away. Additionally, there's no medication currently for children that is used on label, that means FDA approved, for sleep treatment in children. Typically, I see children are prescribed medication that the side effect is falling asleep or sedation, however you want to look at it. And these medications have also shown to interrupt those natural sleep cycles. EKG studies show that children and adults taking sedatives actually have less time in that deep sleep, that restorative stage, and spend more time alternating in the light sleep stages, thus making it more likely to experience night wakings and early awakenings. So there is melatonin. I have the picture up there of melatonin, and it's a natural hormone that we have. There are some studies that show that if you use melatonin, as long as you're kind of cycling it, so you're not using it or giving it, depending if it's for you or your child, every single night, it can help them fall asleep. And it can be a nice, if you've had a rough day or if they slept a little bit later that morning and they need some assistance falling asleep that evening, melatonin can help them. The challenge with giving it every single night is that, again, it is a naturally made hormone. And so we don't want to teach our bodies or their bodies that our bodies don't need to make it as much because we're getting this supplement. And so you just kind of want to keep it off again and on again and not use it every single night because then your body might start, or their body might start adjusting how much it's naturally making. The last point that I wanted to make, and then I can take questions if we have time, is self-care. So one of the biggest components of sleep disruptions is that the family is also not getting sleep. So looking at things like, are there respite providers that can come in and let you have a nap? Can you guys, can parents, if it's a two-parent household, can you guys alternate? One person, getting up in the middle of the night. And particularly when you do start looking at sleep treatment behaviorally, you'll want to have a plan of action because some of the behaviors, they don't change immediately. So if you implement some of these things, you're not going to see it happen right away. Particularly things like if you have to help them learn to go to sleep on their own, then what that will look like is walking them back to bed without too much interaction, have them go back to bed and then you leave. And it can be a little bit of a process. And so you want to make sure you have some support and help during that process. And again, making sure that when necessary, you reach out to a professional to help you come up with the appropriate interventions to help with you and your family. So are there any questions that I can answer? Any specific situations that you guys might need some assistance with? I don't know what we have time for, but.
You can unmute yourself if you have questions.
How can we write a sleep goal for parents?
As a BCBA?
Yeah.
Well, so typically my sleep goals will be written in as parent goals because they're usually the ones that are having to implement it, right? So I'll usually start out with identifying an appropriate routine and then look at following that routine or we'll taking data. So with families, I always make sure that I get some baseline data from them. So they'll do a sleep journal and they're essentially tracking when the child is being put to bed, when they are falling asleep, any night wakings, any early wakings, and then any medication they're taking. And a lot of times we'll look at what the environment looks like and develop a plan of action together. So I meet with families at least once a week for developing the behavioral plan and helping them kind of coach through those issues. One interesting point is that typically the sleep behaviors, if the family is able to really jump in and get the behavioral program going, you'll see a change in the sleep behaviors in as little as about a week.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question from a parent. She gives melatonin to her child, and she said that it doesn't work because her child fall asleep but not stay asleep. So
Right.
what do you suggest in that case?
Yeah, that's a very common thing, both with melatonin and with sleeping medications is, again, that child hasn't learned how to fall asleep on their own. So when they do wake up in the middle of the night, they're not able to put themselves back to sleep. So for that, I always look at the surrounding contingencies and try and see if we can adjust the environment to teach the child to fall asleep on their own, and then look at, what are they doing in the middle of the night if they are waking up, or what are they doing early in the morning, and make sure that there's no competing variables there. This is my littlest, Mr.
I bring it more spaces ourselves.
Oh, thank you. Okay, go help Daddy with it. Sorry. Yeah, so a lot of times those night wakings have to do with, again, that behavior of not being able to help themselves fall asleep. And then they're seeking out the family either to help them fall asleep, or, sometimes the kids will just go into the parents' room and sleep on the floor. I've seen it all.
I think you have a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see it.
I don't even have my chat up. My apologies. Okay, so the question is, when is an appropriate time to seek a professional for help, and how do you know when to refer out? So if you're a parent and you're looking at when an appropriate time to seek a professional for help would be is, I think, honestly, the sooner the better. So if you are finding that you guys have tried some of the tips, I think by the time I come across families, by the time we actually do a consultation, the vast majority of them have tried the bedtime routine. The vast majority of them have tried, looking at a lot of these environmental things, but it's the combination of them all together and looking at some of these other competing contingencies. A big one is the children looking to have mom help them put them to sleep, right? They're having mom in the room. or sharing a bed. So I would say an appropriate time to seek a professional for help would be when you are at that stage where you're recognizing that you want to see change in your child's sleep. You have to kind of be ready to make some short-term sacrifices for those long-term gains. I will say that a lot of it is there are probably, 3 to 7 nights of it can be pretty challenging because you might get some extinction burst behaviors, which is where you might see more calling out, or you might see more leaving the bed because you're just trying to teach them to fall asleep on their own. And it can be a little bit of a learning curve for your child. So you have to kind of be willing to do the follow through and have some supports in place. Sometimes I'll suggest if the child has some stronger behaviors, I'll suggest that the family do it on the weekend. They start on a Friday evening so they don't have to go to work the next couple of days. And then there's some things that you can do as a professional to alleviate those and set the child up for success. So like that first night that we're looking at, we might push the bedtime, by 45 minutes or an hour. So instead of the bedtime being at 8, we might say, okay, well, we're just going to start at 9. That way they're nice and tired, they're ready and primed for sleep. And then they're more likely to fall asleep quickly for you. There's, for children over the age of about 3, there's another intervention called the Bedtime Pass by Dr. Fryman. He's the first one that kind of developed it and did some studies. And it's a beautiful program. It's behaviorally based. And essentially you give the child bedtime passes. They're like a free get out of jail pass. Jail. And so the child can use the bedtime pass to leave the room for an appropriate activity, like I want extra hugs or I want a glass of water. They would trade in a bedtime pass for that activity. And then once they've used their bedtime pass, and sometimes we'll give the kiddo, 2 or 3 bedtime passes per night and fade them out over time. But once they trade that bedtime pass in, then you use the extinction procedure, which is you withhold attention or, remove whatever the reinforcer is in the evening that they're seeking out. And that bedtime pass, what the studies show is that the children, they might try it the first couple of nights, but then they'll hold on to it because they'll, it's almost like a security blanket where if they'll want to have it if they want it later in the evening, and then they wake up in the morning with it. And you could add a little contingency in if you wanted, where if they have it in the morning, they get to have a special breakfast or something like that. So you can add a little bit of a reinforcer there. So, and then for a professional, how do you know when to refer out? I think the answer to that is probably, to use your professional judgment. If you're seeing that if there's any potential dangerous behaviors, so if the child has any self-injury behaviors or any aggression behaviors that are happening in the evening, I would always recommend referring out or at least getting consultation. I'm happy to consult with other BCBAs who are interested in providing programs for children too. So.
Any other question? Emily, I have a question for you. Most children, especially the children with ADHD diagnosis, take medication for hyperactivity. Do you think that affects the sleep pattern somehow?
The research shows that yes, if they are taking it, the research that's been done looks at if they're taking it in the evening. So it looks like if they take it in the morning, so the ADHD medications, typically they'll take it in the mornings, and then it's kind of out of their system by the nighttime. And it doesn't seem to have this strong effect that we see when a child is taking, for example, risperidone is prescribed frequently for children with autism, and they'll take it at nighttime because it does have a sedation effect. But what we're seeing is that sedation effect kind of correlates with some funky brainwave sleep cycle issues.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Put my email address in the chat. Dominic was asking.
Any other question? No. Well, thank you, Emily.
I did want to say really quick for families that are on, you know, it is impossible to kind of provide all of the options that are available, but there are a lot of options. And I just really want to encourage you that if you're finding that you're having struggles with sleep, do reach out, because there are treatments, and they have been very successful with not too much of a headache.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Emily. It was an amazing presentation. Thank you, everyone. And hopefully we'll have you another time.
Oh, I love it. Yes. Thank you guys so much. What a wonderful group.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.